James Edward Yelton. I was a member of the United States Navy. I achieved the rank of Petty Officer Second Class, which is called E5, and I served from 1965 through 1972.
Okay, and then spell your first and last name so I can make sure I'm spelling.
Jamesyelton.
Okay, that's all I need, so now you can do your thing.
Okay. Alrighty.
I'm glad you're shooting this way. This is my best side, by the way.
I think I also need on camera, let's see, what is this being for?
Okay.
Okay. So, are you filming?
Yeah.
Okay. This is an interview conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Today's date is February 25th. This is recorded at Jefferson College. Jessica Yancey is a friend of Mr. James Yelton, who is going to be the interviewer. Okay. Where and when were you born?
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, November the 8th, 1946.
Okay, and can you tell me some of your parents' occupations, number of siblings, stuff like
Well,
that?
I'm the youngest of 4 children. My brother's the oldest, and I have 2 older sisters. The periods of my service, is that what you were asking?
Your parents' occupation, number of siblings.
I've had 4 major careers. My short career was the United States Navy when I served. And then after I got out, I was a police officer. Mm-hmm. And then I went back into radio because I had worked into radio after I got out of the Navy. And then I went into the entertainment business. I was a blackjack dealer at one of the local casinos here.
Okay. Other family members, did anyone else serve in the military with you or in the service with you? I'm sorry.
They weren't in the service with me. My, being the youngest of the family, my brother served. He got in just at the end of World War II. He was in the United States Navy. My father was also in the United States Navy. During the war, they were drafted. My father was actually drafted in the Navy, and my brother enlisted.
Oh, really? Can you tell me about how you drafted into the service, or was you enlisted, or anything like that?
I enlisted. I joined the Naval Reserve when I was in high school. It was my intent to make a career out of the Navy. That's why I joined the Naval Reserve when I was in high school. Then upon graduation, I went into the Navy on active duty by going to radar school at Great Lakes Station in northern Illinois, just north of Chicago. Upon completion of radar school, I came back to my Naval Reserve unit, served there for approximately 6 months, and then I went on active duty and ended up being stationed in California, in Southern California, in San Diego.
Really? So you knew that you always wanted to go into the Navy?
I did. During that time, during the radical 60s, there were a lot of things going on at that time. There was, the hippies were coming about, and radical movements were starting everywhere, from the Black Panthers all the way through, student campuses being in unrest. And the United States was trying to establish itself as a world power. Even though we were still looked upon as a fledgling, country. We were still one of the youngest ones. France and Germany and England, of course, were the dominant ones. France tried a thing in Vietnam. They were, a republic of Vietnam was a French territory at one time. And then they were overthrown by the Vietnamese, and later on, when the 2 countries separated into North Vietnam and South Vietnam, North Vietnam, of course, being run by the communists, and South Vietnam being a democratically elected unit, it made it political powder keg. There was a lot of talk about, I'm sure in class you've learned about, the the Red Peril. They were afraid that if they got North Vietnam and took over South Vietnam, it'd be a march into, Thailand and Cambodia. And, actually Cambodia did become a little bit of a communist regime for a while because of the Khmer Rouge. But when I joined, all of this was going on, and the United States was trying to establish its power. And again, me being a Navy brat, kind of, having relatives that it served, I wanted to serve also.
Okay. So does that like follow up with one of the reasons why you wanted to go into the Navy? It was kind of like a thing in your family that you did? Yeah,
it was a family tradition. Plus, like I said, because of the political situation, I felt that at that time they were drafting a lot of people. And if I had been drafted, could have ended up in the Army or the Marine Corps, either one. And had to have been putting on fatigues and slogging through the jungles and getting shot at and eaten up by mosquitoes. Happened a little bit when I was in the Navy, but not on the scale it would have happened if I'd have been drafted into the Army.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about the early days of training camp and how was that for you?
It was interesting. Because I was in reserves, I didn't serve the full. At that time, they were serving I can't believe it, a 32 or 16-week, 20 or 32-week boot camp, which is the basic training where you learn how to, march like a sailor and dress like a sailor and, fold your clothes and do your own laundry. You'd be surprised how many of these kids that went to boot camp had never made their own beds.
Really?
So that was interesting learning that. We also learned military procedures, military jargon. There's an old joke about a guy reports to boot camp, and his platoon leader tells him, he says, "Now look, son, you're in the Navy. We say things different here." He says, for example, that's not the floor, that's called the deck. That's not a wall, it's called the bulkhead. That's not the ceiling, it's called the overhead. And those aren't stairs, they're called ladders. And if you don't learn those things, I'm going to throw you out that little round window, which is also known as a porthole.
Okay. Can you specify your training that you exactly had? What type of training that you went through?
Well, after I graduated from boot camp, which again, they teach you all the military stuff, learn how to shoot a rifle, how to march. And the big thing about marching in order is so you do everything in a uniform manner. In battle, if you've studied battle at all, you see that, the groups move in regiments and they march down fields and, they draw positions and make what they call pincer movements to trap the enemy. You learn that type of thing. Upon graduation from boot camp, I went to radar school and learned how to, radar is a thing that, an acronym for radar and detection ranging, which is the way they use to identify ships that you can't see. Radar can reach a lot farther than the eyes can and can pick up little small things that you can't even see by eye when you're closer to them. So I learned how to operate radar, how to recognize what a contact was, whether it was a mountain, a ship, a flock of birds, whatever. I also learned maneuvering, how the ships maneuver in formation. It's a lot more difficult than, like you're driving down the road and you're trying to maintain a distance between you and the car in front of you. Well, imagine if there was giant waves pushing you toward that thing. You'd have to adjust your position and, turn the steering wheel a little bit more. Well, in the Navy, when you're talking about a ship that's longer than a football field, then that makes it a little bit more difficult. That's why you have to be very precise. So we also learned how to navigate by use of radar. We would take radar sweeps of different parts of landscape, and we could, figure out where this piece was to that piece was, and that would show where we were on the map. We also did most of the voice communications aboard ship, and that's really what I was looking forward to. I could have been a radioman, and a lot of people think the radiomen are the ones that are always doing the radio talking. Well, they don't do. About 2/3 of the radioman's work is doing code work. Working from code, so that's why I wanted to become a radarman. They did the voice communications, and that was one of my specialties. I was a primary radio telephone talker for Naval Gunfire Support when we were shooting off the coast of Vietnam.
Really? So can you tell me about how was it adapting to the life that you were living, coming from regular home to really strict rules or whatnot like that? How was your social life?
It was quite a bit different. Especially the Navy is one of the most difficult services, as far as the rest of the services. You are kept away from your friends and your neighbors, but you're on dry land for the most part, and for the most part you could go out into the general public. When you're aboard ship, if you try to go out in the general public, you're going to end up being very wet for a long time. So it's almost like being in prison. You're in there. At the time that I was in, there were no females aboard ship. It was just, a whole bunch of guys. Now they do have it, and they've got separate berthing for the ladies and all that, which is, I think, a wonderful thing from two ways. We could go into that later if you want. But that and adapting to a rigorous routine. In high school, or even in college, you have to get up to go to your morning class at a certain time. You have to be here and be there, and you've got so much time for lunch. In the Navy, it's a lot more rigid. You know what time you're going to get up. It may not be in the morning, because if you're operating in a battle zone, you have to have watches on duty 24 hours a day. So your morning may start in the afternoon. As a matter of fact, when we were doing naval gunfire support in Vietnam, we had what they called port and starboard watches. I would be on duty, on watch, in the radar shack from breakfast time to lunchtime. From lunchtime till dinner time, I was off. I could go down and try to sleep if I could over the noise of the guns going off. And then I'd had to be back up at midnight to go back on duty again until 7 in the morning. And at 7 in the morning, we get to rest, then we go back on duty. So that was called port and starboard watches. Port means left and starboard means right. So it's just, half of them do this and half of them do that.
Really? So did you adapt pretty quickly, or?
It doesn't take much to adapt to that. It's hard to sleep, to get adjusted to sleeping at different times. And again, this wasn't a constant thing. Most of the time you stood 4 watches, whereas rather than working, 6 to 8 hours a day, and then having, only 6 to 8 hours off before you started again, you'd work your 6 to 8 hour watch, and then you'd be off 6 to 8 hours before your next watch. So that was beneficial too.
And where did you serve, and how was that for you?
How was that for me? It was enjoyable. I adapt to routine quite well. I like to be independent. I'd like to say, I really don't feel like doing this today and do it, but when you're in a situation like that, you have no choice.
Can you give me some type of details of the trip that you took to Vietnam, you say?
Yes. We went on training exercises quite a bit, just off the coast of Southern California to prepare to go to Vietnam. We went. One year we were in the midshipman training fleet where we were training midshipmen from the United States Naval Academy, young men who were going there to become officers. We went to Hawaii with them. We also went to Hawaii several other times on just general operations. We went to the Philippines, a place called Subic Bay, and I also had the opportunity to go to Manila in the Philippines. That's where a lot of the battles in World War II occurred. The place that General MacArthur had his headquarters was Manila in the Philippines, and he did return there. And I'm sure you've studied that in school too. So I got to see the places there where the major battles occurred, and it was really quite interesting. And then again, Vietnam, we were in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is between Vietnam and then on the other side is China, Red China. I did get to spend some time in country in Vietnam, very short time, but it was enough time for me to know that I'm glad that I chose the Navy rather than the Marine Corps or the Army, because I didn't want to be in the jungle. I didn't want to be wearing wet clothing. I didn't want to be surrounded by people that didn't speak my language that wanted to kill me. It's not a very comfortable situation. Whenever things get bad for me now, I think, yeah, this is better than Christmas in Vietnam.
Okay, can you tell me some of your duties that you had to do?
Again, I was when I reached the rank of Petty Officer Second Class, I was a watch supervisor, and what I did was I was in charge of the the various men that were on duty, watching the radar scopes, doing the maneuvering, doing the radio telephone talking. I made sure that they changed out because it can get pretty boring times watching the same radar scope. I also, during my off time, worked with the second ship that I was on, the USS Sutherland, worked on trying to get an intership radio going there, which was affiliated with the Armed Forces Radio Network.
Okay. Can you tell me about some of the emotions relating to when you guys were at Vietnam? How was that?
It's very difficult. I noticed in the short time that I was in country, the emotions were a lot different than being on ship. I felt pretty well protected aboard ship, but there were times when there was fear. You know, you're operating in a big ocean on something that's, you know, probably like 3 big buses together. And imagine that on the ocean and being pitched back and forth. There was a lot of times when the weather was so bad that, you know, we could have, you know, turned over and drowned. That's how, you know, most of the people in the Navy, even during the wars, they got shot, the ships got shot, started filling with water or caught on fire and then sunk. And most of the people died simply by drowning. Or if you ever saw the movie Jaws, they talk about the USS Indianapolis where sharks got most of them. We were in a typhoon once in the what they call the Bashi Straits near Japan, and it was a Force 5 type of typhoon, and we took a wave. Ships tend to roll a lot, and they can take, most ships, the destroyer I was on could take a 27-degree roll, which is about like that. If it went farther than that, it would tip all the way over, and if it went over, water would come in the stacks, it would blow out your engines, and it would sink. We lost one of our engines, so we were operating on one engine in these heavy seas, and we went to general quarters because we were that close to having to abandon ship, and that's the scariest I've been in my life. I was standing watch, and I was the watch petty officer, and I had a guy next to me who got seasick, and he said, "Give me a bucket." So I handed the bucket to him. Instead of taking the bucket and throwing up, he just grabbed hold of the edge of the bucket, leaned over, and threw up right in front of me. That's the closest I came to being seasick the whole time I was in the Navy.
That's good.
Some of my other duties, I mentioned I was in Armed Forces Radio, trying to get an Armed Forces Radio ship started on our ship. Most of the time they were on larger ships like battleships or on aircraft carriers. We started one for our own entertainment just to do it. So I went through Armed Forces Radio and got a lot of stuff. We had to follow a lot of restrictions in that. If you ever saw the movie Good Morning Vietnam, and it was with Robin Williams when he played Adrian Cronar. I was in Vietnam during the time he was broadcasting in country. I was broadcasting aboard ship. Wasn't as funny as him because I didn't know a lot. I wasn't formally trained like he had been. But there were a lot of restrictions that we had to follow. We were censored. We couldn't, you know, broadcast everything because you didn't want the enemy to listen in and know what we were doing. Plus, there were a few things like different songs that we weren't allowed to play. Some of the people may be, you know, you're way too young to remember a song about the Battle of New Orleans. It was Johnny Horton, and it went in 1814. We took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans and we fought the bloody British in the town of New Orleans. Well, in the chorus it talks about chasing the British out from New Orleans with General Jackson and his troops. Unfortunately, we were serving with a lot of Royal Navy, British Navy personnel, and when we would meet on the beach in different bars, if that song came on the jukebox or if they heard it on the ship's radio, it could cause fights between the troops. So we were censored by saying we couldn't play that anymore.
So you guys are very limited to basic activities that you guys could do. Okay. Let's see. So were there any friendships? I'm assuming that there were friendships that you formed with different people on the service. Oh
yeah, it's been 45 years since I went through basic training and went to radar school, and I'm still in contact with a few people that I knew. One of my closest friends in radar school, we got different ships, but we stayed in contact with each other over the years. He lives in Mississippi. I still talk to him every now and then. As a matter of fact, I joined the Naval Reserve with a young man that I went to junior high school with. We went into the reserves together, but then got assigned to different ships. We kept together over the years. When I got out of the Navy, we met again and, continued our friendship, and I still talk to him on a regular basis.
Wonderful. That's great. So you guys share different stories or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. Stories, naval stories and war stories, and any, armed forces personnel tell stories they call war stories. Do you know the difference between a war story and a fairy tale?
No.
Well, a war story or a fairy tale starts out once upon a time. And a war story starts out, now this isn't any bull, when I was in the service, and that's the only difference.
Okay. So how was the communication back home? How did you keep in touch with your family members? And
Letter
stuff like
writing.
that?
We didn't have cell phones back then. And, the ship's radio communication was, deluged with different things coming in, orders and where we were going. And so you couldn't just jump on the radio and talk to somebody. So it was mainly letter writing. If we got into a port where they had a telephone, we could telephone, but long distance rates were phenomenal. So we didn't do that an awful lot. So it was mainly letter writing.
So how was the letter writing when you're on the ship? So how did you send it off to back home, and how did they receive it? Or how long did it take?
That was a big problem. If I would write a letter, say on Monday, I would put it in to the ship's mail room. We had a mail orderly. He was the one that was in charge of the mail. Now, we didn't have a daily pickup of mail. It would be picked up sometimes 2, 3, 4 days later. They tried to make as much mail delivery as they could, but there were a lot of things such as battle operations. If we were operating in a hostile zone, we just couldn't have helicopters flying over and dropping our mail. There was also weather conditions. Out at sea, it's very difficult to fly a helicopter in or even send a ship to service. The way we got our mail most of the time was we'd have to refuel every 2 or 3 days. So when we refueled, that supply ship would have supplies for us, would have fuel, plus they'd have mail. So we'd get mail from the ships most of the time. Every now and then, though, we had helicopters that delivered it to us.
Okay. Do you know how long did it take for them to get the piece of mail you sent them?
Some letters I got in Vietnam were 2, 3 weeks old.
Really?
I was married at the time, my first marriage. I'd get a letter from my wife telling me what had happened in San Diego or that the Cardinals had done this or that, and that was like 2 weeks ago. And I had already heard it on the ship's radio.
Really? So that's a lot different from
Yeah.
now. We get mail every day. It usually don't take weeks. That's good. So what is your recreation now of your off-duty pursuits that you do?
Well, I don't have, when I was in the service, what the off-duty was. Unfortunately, the military turns a lot of people into alcoholics because that's really about all there is to do when you're out there is go to bars when you get off duty. My father was an alcoholic, so I was a social drinker. I didn't go out to get drunk like a lot of guys did. And alcoholism is a disease, and I don't know what the statistics are, but I'm sure during World War I, World War II, and Korea and Vietnam, there were guys that because of the emotional stress and strain that they were under whenever they got leave or liberty, they'd go to drink to forget about those things that were happening, to try to block it out of their minds. And that's a bad way to cushion yourself against that. That's why we have a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder these days, because people even can't block it out even with alcohol. The Navy was pretty good at trying to give you recreation and time to do things. Every port we went into, there were tours set up. I've been to Hong Kong, just a beautiful city, and they take you into and show you all of the things that you'd want to see in the cities. They also have, on the bases, they have movie theaters, they have bowling alleys, trying to keep people from not having to go over to the bars to do that. But again, it's it's very difficult. I can remember one situation when I was going to radar school. Are you familiar with the Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Birds?
Yeah.
Well, they had The Birds showing at the Base Theater, and it was springtime. And I didn't notice it going in, but after we saw the movie, my friend and I, the one that lives in Mississippi that I still recall, we came out of the movie theater, and there was this bush with about 100 birds on it. And I went, whoa! It was deja vu. But yeah, there was a lot of opportunities, a lot of great places to see over there. I learned how to scuba dive when I was in the Navy. Just different stuff. I got to see my first Broadway play when I was on a cruise in New York. Saw Alan Alda from MASH in one of his first Broadway plays that he ever did. So, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to do things. But again, sailors drifted off to the bars.
Yeah. So there were different things you could do for
Right.
recreation, but most of the time it was the bar to get their mind off of it. So how was it when the war in? Well, it's not the war, you said. When it ended, coming home, how was that process?
Well, I was out by that time. I had served my length of service, and when I saw the things that were happening, again, Vietnam was a different type of war than even Korea. Korea, the people came back from Vietnam or from Korea, you know, they were still kind of recognized as being heroes, even though we didn't technically win the war. It was compromised. You know, they agreed to, you know, stay in northern Korea, and us. South Korea had their own independent government, but still we didn't win anything. But the men weren't looked down upon. When I came back from my first cruise in Vietnam, that's when the war protests were going on. They were saying that we shouldn't be in Vietnam, you know, we're interfering with those people's way of life. People in Vietnam had been fighting among themselves, the North and the South, for thousands of years. Tribal conflicts going on. As I said, the French had it as a colony at one point. They couldn't control it. They were driven out. We were just trying to stop communism, but a lot of people didn't believe that. To this day, the actress Jane Fonda is looked down upon by many veterans because she gave aid and support to the enemies, is what they would call it. She went over to North Vietnam, had her picture taken sitting on a North Vietnamese anti-aircraft battery, which was shooting down our planes. She met with prisoners. There's a place called the main prison in Hanoi in North Vietnam was called the Hanoi Yelton, which was a derogatory term. It was nowhere near being a Hilton-type hotel. It was a mess. It was a dungeon. And she interviewed prisoners who tried to pass messages to her. She turned the messages in to the North Vietnamese. I am judging her for doing that, but I can understand why. I'm sure she was afraid if she'd have tried to take those messages out, she would have been in trouble. But then again, by the same token, she should have tried.
Yep.
Because by doing that, it caused those prisoners to be beaten mercilessly. And some of them died because of it. So to this day, I can't enjoy watching a Jane Fonda movie. A lot of soldiers that came back from Vietnam that wore their uniforms were spit upon when they'd walk in public. As I said, the anti-war protests, they were put out. Did you ever see the movie, what's the one with Tom Hanks about Run, Forrest Gump?
Forrest Gump.
Well, remember when he went and stood up in Washington, D.C. and made the speech? There were a lot of guys that did that were influenced into doing things that they shouldn't have done. Drugs were pretty rampant then. It was one of the weapons they used against us. They would, get some of our guys hooked on drugs, and, they're the ones that would turn against us too. There were guys that I understand that believed that we were not supposed to be in Vietnam. They disagreed with the way the government was doing things. They thought that the military-industrial complex was wrong and should be dismantled. I can't blame them for feeling that way, but, it's my country, right or wrong, we have to defend it.
So
I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of preachy.
You're fine. That's good. So how was it when you got the call or talk with how you guys were going home? Were you excited?
Oh, yeah. I was, the first trip, I made 2 trips to Vietnam. The first trip, when we hit the United States, we were in our home port of San Diego, and all of our families were there waiting on the piers. I'm sure you've seen pictures of, people returning from battles and from, now Afghanistan. They're welcomed by their families. It's so good to see your family after that length of time, when there were many times you didn't think you were going to make it back at all. So there was a lot of tears. Grown men do cry. And if there's a man out there that says that he hasn't been brought to tears, there's something wrong with him. So it was great to be back home, again, until we stepped off the base and had the civilians, for the most part. It was on the coast mainly, in California, that I was treated poorly. I was never spit upon, but I knew people who were. When I got out of the Navy, I went to Salt Lake City, Utah, to get a job in radio. I'm not saying I was treated badly there, but I could see some of the indifference in people's eyes and some of the disrespect, and thinking, he's a baby killer. There was the My Lai massacre that you may have studied about Lieutenant John Calley, who decimated an entire village. That was just one of many things like that happened. Bad things happen in war, and it shouldn't have happened, and they're trying to prevent that. It still happens these days. You hear about it in Afghanistan. It's just one of the things that goes with war.
Okay. So where were you when the war ended? You said you went twice.
I was, the second tour, I was due to get out before the ship got back to the United States, which, again, there's a phrase that's used in the military a lot called snafu. Situation, normal, all fouled up. That's the clean way of saying it. But there was a snafu in my case, to where my ship that I was on, my original ship that I'd gone to Vietnam first with, was in the naval yards getting refitted for some new equipment. I would have had to extend my enlistment to go on the ship again to return to Vietnam. I didn't want to do that. A, I didn't want to extend my enlistment. B, I didn't want to go back to Vietnam again. And C, when they told me that if I didn't do it, I'd be put on a ship that was going to go to Vietnam, I said, okay, go ahead and do that. I've got less than 6 months, and the normal Vietnam displacement is 6 months. It'd be silly to put me on a ship and send me over there, wouldn't it? Not to the Navy, it wasn't. They sent me to a ship. I was given 3 days travel time from San Francisco to San Diego, reported aboard a ship. The next day it got underway for Vietnam.
Really? So how was your reaction for that? Of course you didn't.
I was very unhappy.
Yeah, of course you did not like that.
My wife suffered through my first deployment. I know how rough, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, and I've heard it said in a lot of things about Afghanistan and, Iran and Iraq and all of those situations where the families suffer as much as the servicemen do. And they do. And at the time that it happened, I was very bitter about it. My first wife left me. When I came back, she had moved in with another guy, and my marriage fell apart. That was another reason why I didn't stay in the Navy. So I was very disappointed about that. I flew back before my ship was due back and found this out, and it emotionally destroyed me for a while.
So not only was you not okay with it, your family was not okay with it.
No, they weren't.
Yeah. So it affected everyone. So when you did return home, how was that? Or how did you return home?
I flew back from, we were in the Philippines, we were in Japan at the time. So I got off the ship in Japan, I took a train to an Air Force base, got upon an airliner that you probably never heard of, Global Airlines, which was run by the CIA at the time. They ran most of the airlines were flying people in and out of Vietnam. So I flew back to a place just north of San Francisco, an Air Force base there, and went to the naval base in San Francisco. It was called Treasure Island, kind of like Robert Louis Stevenson's place, but it wasn't a fantasy. It was a real base. And it was between San Francisco and Oakland, right in the middle of San Francisco Bay. And I was processed out there, and then I ended up going back to San Diego because I had some things that were still aboard my ship. And I waited for it to arrive, got my stuff, and moved to San Diego, or from San Diego to Salt Lake City, Utah, and got a job in radio there.
Okay. So how was it adjusting back to your regular normal life, or how long did it take for you to adjust back to it?
It's really hard to say. A lot of the guys had difficulties in adjusting, especially the people that have been in country. People had nightmares about, you know, and flashbacks and the post-traumatic stress disorder that I mentioned. Mine wasn't that bad because emotionally mine was, you know, I got out, I made it back. The thing that I was emotionally upset about is that my marriage fell apart. And I thought it was a safe and secure marriage until I came back and found out what was going on. And that was my main focus at that time. I didn't think of anything else until I'd say about 6 months later, the movie came out with Marlon Brando and Martin Sheen called Apocalypse Now. That movie brought the war back to me, and I started having nightmares about it again. And they were mixed with the nightmares about my ex-wife, so it was a pretty emotional time for me. I talked to people. I had a friend that was a minister that I talked to, and with their help, I, you know, coped with these things and eventually got over it.
So I guess,
you're never really over it, but pretty much over it.
Adjusting to it, adapting to it. Was there a lot of counseling that returning from service?
No, there wasn't at that time. It was available to an extent, but they didn't have the expertise in how to deal with it. Yeah. Unlike my situation, most of the guys that came back from Vietnam had deeper-seated problems, post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of these guys had been, you know, days and days and weeks in the jungles, in the rain, with people shooting at them. So they came back and they were psychologically more messed up than I was. It's totally different serving aboard ship, but still, that's a lot of psychological stress also. We were talking about things that were offered to them. During World War II, most of the problems that they had that would be called post-traumatic stress disorder now was simply called battle fatigued. They figured, you know, guys were just tired of being out there. They needed, you know, all they needed to do was relax. People don't know what it's like. In the short time that I spent in country, I was shot at. I had mortars fired upon me. We were rocket attacked like 3 or 4 different times. That's a pretty scary thing to think that somebody's trying to kill you. I sat one night out on a forward observation post, just me and one other guy, in the rain, waiting for people to come to kill us. And that'll weigh upon you. I had dreams about that when I went back to the ship, but you know, they went away. And I only did that once. But still to have dreams about it, and I know what those guys went through. Later on, when I was in the Navy, there were 2 gentlemen that were doing a walk across country from, I think it was California someplace, to Washington, D.C., trying to get the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall supported and built. And I interviewed them on the radio, and halfway through the radio, I cried. I was halfway through the interview, I cried because, you know, these guys had, you know, done so much for our country, and we're doing this. And you got to I admire everyone that has served in the military. Not everybody's, you know, the type of person that you would want to be. They may be psychologically damaged. They may have been psychologically damaged before, and they just got worse. but I understand, and that's all I ask people to do is understand.
That's great. So you say you do keep in contact with some of the people that you went into the service with, and you guys are really good friends afterward.
Yes,
How's your
I
guys'
do.
relationship now?
Again, because of the distance, one of them lives fairly close by,
Yeah.
but this is a guy I've known since junior high school, so I think we'd still be in contact even if we hadn't been in the Navy together. I've met since I've got on Facebook. It's a great thing about the computer world. I got on Facebook and found a ship, the ship that I was on. They had their own space on there, so I ran into some people that
That's good.
you know I served with, and one of them, who I just barely remembered, had distinct memories of me. He goes, "Yeah, I used to, when you were on the ship's radio, I used to listen to you every night. You were the funniest guy, and you were always entertaining." He says, "And I used to do an imitation of one of our officers, which got me into a little trouble." But he says that was the greatest thing. Everybody talked about that all the time. So, those reinforcement things and knowing. Remember the movie they had out recently that Spielberg did with, it was on HBO called Band of Brothers? Mm-hmm. That's what we are. We're a band of brothers. And if I ran into somebody that had served on the ship, even if I hadn't, had served in a different division or hadn't known them, they're my brother.
That's great. So you guys got a good bond. So how has the wartime that you did experience, how has it affected your veteran life now?
Well, it's made me, as I said, I'm bitter about some things. I'm starting in my old age to tenderly forgive those that have done wrong against me. I don't think I'll ever completely get over what happened and the fact that I've lost a lot of friends, a lot of close friends, who either didn't come back at all from Vietnam or who came back not the same way they went over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So any life lessons learned in the service?
Oh yeah, quite a few. If you have to throw up and you're outside of a ship, or if you have to spit and you're outside on the deck of a ship, don't spit into the wind. It'll come back and get you.
Yes.
And it's not a floor. No, that's an old story. I learned to respect a lot of people that I served with that were a higher rank than I was. It took me a while, but I started to realize that I didn't need to respect them as a person. I needed to respect their position. Mm-hmm. And I've learned a lot more about feelings. Different people have different feelings about different things, and if you can recognize how a person feels and try to put yourself in their shoes, it makes you a lot better person.
Okay, and I believe we are finished with this interview. Thank you so much, Mr. Yelton.
Thank you.
Taking the time out to interview with me. We're done.